I did learn a lot about like abstinence and family planning and life at birth. I actually disagree with that nowadays. Not life at birth, sorry guys, life at conception.
Right.
But I disagree with that nowadays. But I do know a good bit about it, and I understand.
Shut the f up again.
I am pro-life. If you disagree with my position or you disagree with the pro-life position, you are more than welcome to change my mind.
Okay, where do you think that pro-life and pro-choice arguments stem from? Like, what do you think is the base argument, the base disagreement that people have?
That's actually a very good question. Where's the fork in the road?
Yeah, so what is the beginning fork in the road that makes people really kind of take up arms and get mad?
I think it's what constitutes a human life.
Okay,
it's where life begins.
I think so.
Yeah. I think it's, and I think as a matter of fact, that's the most important question to answer. I think it's the only question that needs to be answered. Otherwise, the rest of it is really one big giant point.
True.
And of course, as a pro-life person, life begins scientifically at conception.
Okay. I also think that that's something that you believe strongly. You know, like that's what you believe strongly.
Scientists, would say,
I don't think that I'm going to be able to change your mind on that, since that is the stemming point of where your beliefs come from.
Well, let me ask this: why would you disagree?
Why would I disagree?
Yeah.
Just because I don't believe that like human life starts at conception. You know what? I actually went all 4 years to a Catholic high school, and I studied intently. I studied the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Catholic Catechism, as well as certain letters written by different saints and apostles. And I did learn a lot about like abstinence and family planning and life at birth. I actually disagree with that nowadays. Not life at birth, sorry guys, life at conception.
Right.
But I disagree with that nowadays. But I do know a good bit about it, and I understand.
Shut the f up again, dude.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Come sit down.
You should have him up next. You should have him up next to see what he's got to say.
All right, we can. He's more than welcome to join in afterward if he wants to.
You asked, I guess, before where the disagreement, where do you think the fundamental disagreement occurs, right?
Yeah,
is that where we were?
The definition of what is human life.
And I posited that life begins at conception. And the reason for it is I truly see it as the only consistent line to draw, because that is when a new, unique human genetic code is created. Completely, it's autonomous from the mother, from the father. It's not the same as sperm. It's not the same as an egg. We had a guy come here and say, well, there's no difference between that fetus and you scraping off dead skin cells. Well, it is. It's entirely different DNA. I don't see any other line that can be drawn that is intellectually consistent. So that's what I believe. What do you believe constitutes a human life? Where do you believe life begins?
You know what? I don't think that that's something. I'm a big believer in science, and I think that we should look to science for certain ethical issues about things, such as learning about the science of skin color. It has nothing to do with your organs or anything like that. It's all about just adaptation to UV radiation. So I think that science is a way to go. And I also believe in the consideration of suffering of living organisms, every living organism. So I think that this is just my personal opinion. As a woman up here, I'm not the spokeswoman for every woman. I'm not. Lots of different women of color, lots of different white women, especially like on UNT campuses and in Texas, have different opinions than mine.
I appreciate that.
Don't at me.
No, I appreciate that, because there was a guy actually kind of came up here earlier, a white knight. He said, all the women raise your hand. Who would want to be forced to carry a baby from rape? And she yelled, she's like, well, I'm not being forced. I'm just not letting you kill the baby. And then he wasn't very comfortable, and he left soon after. So I'm only speaking for myself.
Yeah.
You're only speaking for yourself. So where do you believe life begins? Or what's your view, your worldview on abortion?
My worldview is more centered around suffering.
Okay.
And I don't believe in the suffering of living organisms, of sentient beings.
Okay.
And so I think the consideration of suffering is really important. I think that the consideration of the suffering of a being that may be inside you is also important. But the thing is, I believe that the most qualified people to sit here and to talk about this do not want to sit here and talk about this. Women who have had abortions, or women who are pregnant and thinking of getting abortions, or any women that has had to make that choice or think about that choice, is a person who I think should be up here explaining about the first-hand experiences, the emotions they go through, what their family members say, because there's lots of things that we don't consider about abortion. And I think that if we think that women don't obsess over this question, that's a false conclusion. That is a huge decision a woman has to make in her life if she chooses to.
I think in some instances you're correct. In some instances, my mouth is called out, you're correct. In some, you're not. We had a woman who sat down who had had an abortion and frankly hadn't given it much consideration as to where life begins. We've had men sit down here who have not had an abortion and have had much more cohesive answers. I would ask you this, though. I know you've talked about how your worldview centers on suffering, and I can appreciate that. But why do you believe, for example, I would assume that applies probably to animals as well?
Oh yeah, I'm trying to go vegan, guys.
Okay, there you go. She's being very respectful. So you obviously would want to minimize suffering to animals. Okay. Do you believe that you are less qualified to talk about that issue than a man?
I would actually say that I'm probably more qualified. Okay. Well, let's make sure that we have the proper definition of man.
Okay.
A person with a vagina who can get pregnant. You know, I'm fertile. I can get pregnant. Some women are infertile.
Men have vaginas and can get pregnant now too.
Yeah, sure, whatever. You know, I believe in that.
I don't. Would you say that only farmers should have opinions on the suffering of animals?
No, but I do think farmers have more direct experience with the suffering of animals, and maybe therefore their opinion should be taken a little more seriously than people who've never seen an animal.
But you probably would find more farmers who would advocate for more suffering of animals than yourself.
But that has something to do with...
My point is, should only animal farmers be able to have that opinion? So I think I understand where I'm going here. I don't understand why a woman, or particularly a woman who's had an abortion, would be supremely qualified to discuss an issue if, in fact, it relates to the killing of another human being.
I'm not saying supremely qualified, I'm saying more qualified. Okay. So by that I mean somebody who has a little more experience or a little more education about it.
I would disagree. For the same reason I think you are just as qualified, you are equally as qualified as any man here or any other woman here, person of color, name the race, gender, orientation, on murder, on assault, on battery. I don't think it matters if you've committed it or not, or even if you've been the victim of it or not. I think what is morally correct is an absolute, certainly as it relates to the physical harm of another human being against their will. So we are told this a lot, and I think we even had someone say this, if you don't have a vagina, you can't have an opinion. I don't agree, and I don't understand how that changes the fundamental essence of what abortion is. Is it the ending, the killing of another human life, or not? And like you said, that's where the fork in the road starts. And I think that everything else is negated if we don't come to a clear definition as to what that is.
You're right, and I think, for me personally, as I'm going to say again for the third time, I think we should probably look a little bit to science for that as well.
Okay.
And I think that religion has a really big influence on what we consider life and what we consider valuable. But I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do you think in any way at all possible, maybe now or historically, that the definition of life has been influenced by the fact that it's women who carry this life? So maybe perhaps women historically who've been oppressed have not had the right to choose what happens to their bodies and the right to choose what happens to this life.
Oh, sure. And
women have been forcibly sterilized.
Well, yes. I would say even more so than that, women have been socially engineered or manipulated to place different set values on that baby, throughout history. You've seen that, with Jewish women in Nazi Germany. Sorry, I'm not.
No, I was like.
Well, the reason is because you would actually hear it better when it's in the chest. That's kind of the rule.
Okay.
I promise this isn't a Harvey Weinstein thing. I can pull it away if you need me to.
Thanks.
But I think, for example, Nazis placed a different value on the babies in the womb of Jewish women. In North Korean internment camps right now, people who are dissidents, they force abortions, right? So it's not only people being forcefully sterilized, but there have been different values set upon different kinds of women, often based, or the babies inside of women based on race, ethnicity, or political worldview.
Very true.
I agree. That's terrible. I think we both agree that that's historically been true and it's terrible. And that's also why I have such a problem with the abortion movement in the United States, because it stems from a eugenics movement from Margaret Sanger with Planned Parenthood setting up abortion clinics in impoverished areas in order to try and eradicate the country of Black Americans.
I don't know much about that. That's something that I'm not very educated in.
Okay. Would you look it up after this, though? Margaret Sanger, she's the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she had disdain for Black people.
You know what? Women of color have been historically exploited more than any other group in America, my personal belief, and from the things that I've learned. So I'm really not surprised that even organizations who claim to help women have historically exploited them. That's not surprising to me. Just because it's Planned Parenthood, though, I don't think means anything in particular. In industries all over the world have exploited women: beauty industries, health
Sure.
industries, clothing.
Yeah, but specifically
Food.
targeting areas so that women of color kill their babies to try and reduce their population, I would say is a little bit more perverse than telling someone they should use this kind of lip gloss to look like Claudia Schiffer.
And are we sure that it's to reduce? Are we sure that it's some sort of genetic, like
Yes.
ethnic cleansing?
Yes, Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're saying nowadays
That's
that for
these
sure
are the roots of Planned Parenthood, and this is
Okay.
why you find them disproportionately set up in areas where you have women of color. They would argue that it's due to poverty and that they're there to help them. That's not the history of the company. But I think we both agree. That being said, whatever value society places on something doesn't change what it is. For example, I think we would both agree.
I don't agree with that. I think that
Okay.
ideas can be just as impactful as actions. I think that the ideas that we've been raised with can definitely influence what we do and the people that we meet and how we treat them.
I agree with you, but I don't think that necessarily means it's right. So, for example, slavery, good or bad?
Bad.
Okay, we would both agree. These aren't trick questions, right?
Yeah.
But it was legal. It still is legal all across the world.
So
It's not
yeah, we
legal in the
shouldn't go
United
by, like, that's a, very common mistake. Do not go by legality. Legality is not the same
Right.
thing as, ethics.
As what is more exactly? Well, I say that because you said different societies have placed different values.
Yeah.
So we can't necessarily go by right now when we're talking about abortion, right? There was the Abortion Survivors Born Alive Protection Act that every single major Democratic candidate for president voted against, and this is babies who have survived abortions. This bill would just require that doctors provide them with the same medical care to babies delivered that didn't survive abortions. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, they all voted against this. And when we're talking about abortion in the United States, I think we're talking about well beyond the point where it might even be a debate. When you're talking about, we are even talking about babies that are entirely viable outside of the womb that are being aborted on a regular basis, and that's legal. It doesn't change the morality of the action. And that's why I think it is fundamental to determine what a human life is and where that begins. And as you've said, we start with science. And I hope you understand from me, I know that you said you went to a Catholic school.
Yeah.
I am a Christian, but I haven't brought any of that into this conversation
Yeah.
here. Scientifically, the moment of conception is when there's an entirely different genetic code that determines everything. Hair color, eye color, height, sense of smell, athletic ability is created at conception. Science tells us that is a new, unique human being, and I don't think that we ever have the right to kill another human being.
I think that that's your interpretation of science. I definitely believe that, stem cells have the potential to turn into any sort of specialized tissue. And you're right, it is a seed that has the potential to become a new person. The reason that I'm pro-life...
Sperm is a seed, but that's the exact... For example, I don't see... I don't see sperm killing a sperm the same as abortion. Otherwise, when I was a teenager, I would be committing mass genocide like every other hour when I was 14 years old.
That's what Catholics believe.
Yeah, I don't. So the point is, it's very different. A fertilized egg cell is entirely different from an egg and a sperm. That's the science. I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood here. I don't think that because it's potential necessarily a human being.
You think it is a human being?
This is a unique genetic code that has been formed that determines what kind of a human being it will be. That does not happen until the moment of conception.
Okay, so
That's
you think
the aha
that...
moment.
So do you believe that then genetics is what makes us human? That it's our special gene code, the special Homo sapien gene code is what makes us Homo sapiens?
Well, I believe that, first off, human beings give birth to human babies, right? So we know that when that genetic code is established, it's not going to be a fish, it's not going to be a dog, it's going to be a human being. And that is the moment where exactly what kind of a human being is determined. And I just don't think that we have the right to intervene and terminate, kill that human being. That's why. That's why I think it's the only logically consistent line. And I think we would both agree viability is not really a consistent line because some babies are viable at different times, depending where they are, depending on what point in history, location, whether it's inside the womb or outside the womb. I don't think that a baby that's at 9 months, 5 seconds before it leaves the womb is less of a human being than the baby that leaves the womb. For me, the only logically consistent line, getting a little cold here, I've been out here for a few hours now, is conception, scientifically. And where would you say life begins, or what constitutes a human life?
Well, I'm a big hippie, so
It's a far cry from the modern
Yeah.
leftists who shout people down.
I'm a big old hippie, so my definition of life and what it is to be alive, I guess would have to. Well, would you consider a bacteria alive, even though it's not sentient? You know, what sorts of values do we ascribe to
Well, I
non-human
asked human
animals?
life.
And human life, okay.
Yeah, human life. Only human life is what we're talking about here when we're talking about abortion. Bacteria is not the same as a human being, in my
Listen,
opinion.
you know what? I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know when human life starts, but I think it's important we should know when suffering starts.
Okay. So would you draw the line at suffering?
Yes. I think that's what. But the thing is,
But
is
you
that
don't know yet, so I don't want to press you.
Also, let's not overlook context here. I am pro-life because I really want to represent for the young women and all those women who have been sexually assaulted and who've gotten pregnant. I really believe that young women should have a choice. Like a 13-year-old girl who gets raped by her uncle, she should have a choice of whether this is going to affect her for her whole life or whether this is something that could be taken care of in private.
Well, let me ask you this, because we've had this happen a lot today. So let's allow exceptions. If people bring up a radical exception to the rule to try and justify their
Yeah.
rule. So let's say we make exemptions for rape and incest. Okay? Let's say I agree with you on that. Then would you agree that all other abortions should be illegal?
I think it's so contextual. I think it's
I don't think it's fair to bring it
impossible
up
to say.
because you're bringing up an extreme example when the vast majority of abortions are not committed because of that, because of rape or incest. The vast majority of abortions are simply performed because a woman doesn't want to have a baby.
And I think that that's okay. I think that it's okay.
As long as there's no suffering.
Yeah, but the thing is, how are we supposed to know when suffering starts?
Well, that's where we go to science. It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what? I do endorse the abortion bills that are being proposed and being passed because even though if I don't believe it's perfect, I think that it may be a step in the right direction.
Well, how do you mean abortion bills that prevent the late-term abortions, or you support the abortion bills that further the line of where an abortion can be performed?
I guess further the line.
Okay. Well, this is important
And it's
because you
something
talked
that
about suffering. Where then would you want us to be able to perform an abortion? Where do you think there should be a line drawn?
I'm not a doctor. I don't know about this.
Okay, well, I can tell you the suffering starts here.
Okay.
Okay?
Is it? But this
But
is
abortions
like.
are performed
But
all the way.
you're just telling me this as like one person to another person.
Okay, well, let's assume I'm not lying.
Okay. Let's assume that this is like scientifically credible, which it probably
Yes.
is. You.
Yes. Suffering
this.
begins. This is where brain development. Okay, so suffering begins here. Abortions are being performed all the way to here. So when you say you support bills being proposed, the reason I ask is because here's a bill right here. The survived abortion survivors. I keep forgetting the name. It's like Infant Protection Abortion Survivors Act, I believe, is the entire. It's a whole mouthful. Sorry, my hands are really cold here. If you want to look through that, this was proposed, and this was opposed by every major Democratic candidate. That would simply require doctors to provide the same medical care to babies who have survived abortions. These are babies that are out of the birth canal. They are living, and doctors would simply be required to provide them the same medical care as other babies. Every major Democratic candidate, as a self-professed hippie who's against suffering,
I'm not a
opposed it.
Democrat though. And
Okay.
I'm not a liberal and I'm not progressive. I don't believe in
Okay.
labeling. I believe in contextual things. I think
Okay.
that it's so hard to ascribe yourself to a party. I also think that
But I bring it up because you just mentioned bills furthering
Yeah.
the line, and I'm saying the line is here. Here's the line, and now we're even saying, well, hold on a second, can we at least have a line after the baby's born or survives an abortion where the doctor is just required to give it the same amount of care?
like do you think
and
that
and I do say this because only Democrats want to further that line. No, you don't have to protect that baby if it's born alive if you intended to have an abortion. So when you say you support the laws that further that line, I'm telling you, the line in Texas is here. You can see right here, that's the line in Texas. This is the line in Colorado. So where would it be?
I think
okay?
that this line should be accessible to young women. I just think that
Which line? Where?
This line, the most. I think that
So all the way up to
young
9
women
months.
should have should have access to that.
Okay, well that's fine, but just don't say that it's not consistent to
How
say
about
you
this?
care about
How about
suffering.
this?
You
Listen,
don't, that
I'll
baby
admit
is
it. I
suffering. This
prioritize
baby-
suffering of people who are already alive. I do. I prioritize suffering of people who I recognize as already living, which I guess you could say is technically a bias of what is life and what is considered life.
I think it's a very skewed view of suffering. Listen,
But I
this
think
right here.
that-
I want you to look at this for me.
Yeah.
This baby that you just said is okay to abort they are going to chop off its arms and legs and jam forceps in its head, and it will be fully capable of feeling pain. And if you are comparing that to the suffering of a mother who doesn't want to bring it to term because it might inconvenience her, I think it's a very skewed view as to what suffering is. I am going to side with not killing this baby.
I'm not talking about one mother. I'm talking about all mothers.
Okay.
I'm talking about all women who've been put in situations that was not their fault, that they got victimized in, situations that are really f***ed up.
Sure.
Situations that can change your life and how you think of yourself and how you look at yourself in the mirror. And I just want these options open to women.
Well, like I said, if we
I don't know
eliminate
what-
those scenarios, rape, incest, right? We eliminate those scenarios. You did say abortion all the way up to here. For people who can't see
If it's
yours,
available to one
40
person, you
days.
have to make it available to everybody.
Why do you say that?
Because, well, actually, that's not true. Oops. But I think,
No, I appreciate
think
it.
if there was a law that was passed, it would be hard to separate certain people that could and could not allow to have abortions.
You're right. It is hard.
I also think that would
and
be
most abortion
unfair.
clinics, they don't even ask. We just did actually a video. I would recommend you watch it if you get the chance. We went to a Colorado a late-term abortion clinic. All we do was go in and show people what an abortion is. And a woman had an abortion at 32 weeks. That's 8 months, just because she didn't want the baby. No questions. They didn't ask about rape or incest.
Okay.
Just an abortion and an 8-month-old baby.
And
There's
I have no problem with that. This is the thing. Because
Really?
I told you, I prioritize the suffering of...
Well, no, you're not prioritizing something. You're prioritizing the convenience of a mother over the killing of a baby. Because, come on, let's be honest here. You and I, neither one of us are denying that that is a human life.
Well, we don't know that woman personally. We don't know her life,
do.
and we don't know if she actually...
I do. We
Are you
spent
talking about a specific woman?
Talking about a specific woman.
I don't want to talk about
But this happens
specific
at a rate of
women.
10 to 12,000 abortions per year.
But I don't want to
But
talk about specific women.
Is
I
that
want to
not
talk
ending
about...
a human life? You just said you'd be okay. Can we both agree that's ending a human life at that point?
Yeah, you know what? I think so.
And that baby will suffer. There's no debate about this scientifically.
Yeah, most likely the baby
And
will
you are
suffer.
prioritizing, and again, the vast majority of abortion cases, particularly late-term abortion cases, are not performed
Are you
out of medical
saying that the
necessity.
vast majority of abortions are late-term abortions in
No,
all of
no,
the
no,
United
no.
States?
What I'm saying, the vast majority of abortions are not performed out of medical necessity or due to rape or incest.
How many? Could you tell me a statistic on how
many
many
are
women
late-term
get
abortions?
abortions from 27 to 40 weeks?
Yeah, well,
Like, what's the
okay, so
statistic
late-term
rate of
abortions
that?
is about 1.3 to 1.6, depending on who you ask, depending what statistics you use. That's 10 to 12,000 abortions per year in this period that are not medically necessary.
Okay.
Again, as someone who not only and I do place human life as more valuable than animal life. I'm going to be honest about that. But as someone who does not believe that a human being has the right to physically harm another human being,
Oh, I don't believe that.
but we both agree that's a human being and they're harming them. I don't think it's justifiable at all. So I appreciate you sitting down and I appreciate taking the time. I think that some of your views are maybe not necessarily consistent with what you think them to be.
You know,
if you are against suffering.
I'm 20. I'm still figuring myself out.
I appreciate that.
I don't think that I'm gonna ever believe what you believe or support what you support, but that's okay. There's so many different people in the world who all have different opinions.
And I would hope that you can appreciate that as someone who does believe, for example, that this 34-week-old baby is a human life and capable of feeling pain as a science, that it's my duty to go out and try and educate people and do everything I can to save those lives, just as I'm sure you do for animals.
And you know, that's an admirable reason to go do things like that. And yeah, free speech, exercise your free speech.
And I didn't scream at anyone or try and shut them down.
Yeah,
So
there's
look at
nobody
this.
screaming or anything, so that's great.
Well, no, there was, but he's gone now. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Maddie. I really appreciate you taking
Thank
the time.
you.
I know
It's
it's
really
cold.
nice
I hope
to
you
meet
get your
Watch Louder with Crowder live Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern.